Those of you who've been watching the channel for a while now will know that I'm not only interested in physical performance, I'm also interested in cognitive performance, things like focus, working memory, creative problem solving. And for the last 15 or longer years, I've been trying to train my brain to improve these abilities so that I can think faster, more creatively, solve more problems. So has it worked? Well, I made a 40-minute video discussing that, so I won't go into it in too much detail here, but suffice to say that while some aspects of my cognitive performance are still lacking, which we'll get to later, other aspects certainly did improve. I overcame some OCD tendencies. I think the one method I've been using to boost my creativity even led directly to the creation of a mobile app that turned out to be a hit, and led to me becoming a tech journalist, working with some cool people, even writing a book on programming. I learned how to focus enough to write up to 10,000 or even 30,000 words a day sometimes. But what I wanted to do in this video was to reflect more on that and to give you some more concrete advice on how I'd go about training my brain, because a lot of what I did I think ended up being pointless, and what I've discovered more recently has helped me to get far better and greater gains in shorter time by understanding more about how the brain works and how we can get the very most out of it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video, and I think this is a pertinent time to be discussing this, because without wanting to sound too hysterical or melodramatic, I think that our very cognitive function is right now under attack from artificial intelligence. First, let's take a look at the truth of optimal cognitive performance, because it's not quite what you might have been led to believe. You see, cognitive performance turned out not to be about brain training apps at all. It certainly wasn't about the biohacks or the smart drugs that many people online seem to be peddling. I tried many of those, like modafinil, paracetam, lion's mane. I wore various head devices. I used infrared. The apps work, but not in a real sense. They have very limited near and far transfer. In that regard, we see a lot of commonalities with functional training. The law of specificity. Let's consider working memory for a moment. Working memory is our capacity to store information that we're currently working with. That doesn't mean remembering a colleague's name or learning skills in the long term. Instead, it means using that information in the short term. So for example, maybe learning the names of the characters in a film and remembering those for the duration of the film, or being able to carry over numbers whilst doing mental arithmetic, or the example very often given, being able to remember a phone number while you look for a pen. Now, some people train their working memory with a tool called dual NBAC. This is essentially a task that challenges you to remember a sequence of numbers while being distracted. Many people swear by this for improving their brain function. But the question is, are they getting better at thinking, or are they just getting better at dual NBAC? Because maybe you do get better at remembering phone numbers until you find a pen even, but is this something you feel was holding you back? Does this impact your life in any real way? The way we use working memory in real life is usually far more dynamic and multimodal. For example, we use a form of working memory when remembering the positions of other football players when playing a game of football. We use working memory to form a more cohesive picture of the room we're in, even without being able to see everything around us. We can only take in so much information at once, so instead our eyes will dart around the room, allowing our brains to then form a patchwork approximation of what's in front of us, and this is stored in working memory. That is what we experience, not a direct representation of reality, and this is why working memory can even impact our very vision. And that's something that doesn't get tested for when, for example, assessing driving ability. To train that kind of working memory, you need to use it in that kind of dynamic setting. So how do you train this kind of working memory? Simple. You play football, or basketball, or ultimate frisbee. And there are studies showing that football players and other fast-paced athletes do have superior working memories. By the way guys, this video was sponsored by NordVPN. So NordVPN is a VPN or virtual private network that allows you to connect to the internet via a remote server, so that other websites and other web traffic can't see your IP address because you're not browsing directly from your computer. This just offers you a little bit of extra security and privacy, and also protects you from things like man-in-the-middle attacks if you're connecting to public Wi-Fi. It's just one part of what should be a more comprehensive approach to internet security. And it also means that if you connect to a server located in another country, then you can trick the websites you're connecting to into believing you're from that country. This allows you to access region-locked content. For example, to watch things on Netflix that wouldn't be available in your country normally. I've been using it to connect to a tool that I use to download YouTube videos, and I rely on this for making my own content, so this is just one of the reasons that I use NordVPN daily. You can also use it to circumvent countdown timers, so you can use services and apps online more readily. NordVPN also comes with a bunch of other services and features, such as threat protection, for example, that automatically blocks malicious websites. Go to nordvpn.com/thebioneer and you'll get 4 months free on a 2-year plan. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk if it's not for you. Link in the description down below. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and now on with the show. Again, there are some clear parallels here with functional training as it pertains to physical performance. This is the difference between lifting a straight bar at the gym versus lifting a oddly shaped rock on an uneven surface where it's muddy outside. Speaking of which, learning complex movements is another method that's been shown to boost working memory in this more tangible sense, as you have to pay attention to the positions of your limbs in space and remember what you're supposed to be doing. You know, coordinating yourself to perform a punch or a crawl or whatever it is. There are many other ways you can train working memory in a more multi-modal, immersive manner too. Things like juggling are fantastic, and playing an instrument appears to be particularly good. Playing an instrument is especially good, in fact, because it's not just testing the capacity of your working memory. It also challenges things like your ability to juggle information, to switch between different streams, to maintain that information in the face of distraction. You know, if you're playing an instrument, you need to coordinate your hands or your feet, whatever it is you're playing. You also need to read the music as it's coming in and react quickly. There's an element of multitasking. This is something else to consider, is that working memory isn't just about capacity. There are other important aspects to it. For example, like I say, the ability to maintain that information in your mind even in the face of distraction, the ability to update that information and to juggle between tasks. I personally have always struggled with switching between tasks. I get hyper-focused and then it takes a long time for me to change gears. So for me, just working on improving the capacity of my working memory, that's not going to be as useful as learning to switch between different input streams, essentially. And this is one of the reasons we don't suddenly see footballers become super geniuses. It's why we don't see members of rock bands becoming astrophysicists, because working memory itself has many different capacities, but beyond that, working memory is just one aspect of cognitive function. It's one aspect that happens to be very in vogue, very trendy at the moment, along with things like meditation and stoicism. It seems that culture at large wants us to be focused and to ignore the little voice in our head that could bring us down, to block out distractions and to complete the task at hand. And this is all useful to be able to do, but it's still only one small aspect of cognitive performance. Actually, these skills are almost diametrically opposed to things like creativity, creative problem solving, abstract reasoning, and thinking outside the box, things that in many ways are more useful if you want to come up with great ideas that are going to improve your life in some meaningful way, if you want to come up with fun things to do with your friends, if you want to see the world differently and have breakthroughs that impact on your own belief system. This all requires creative thinking. If you want to paint or draw or to write stories, all of this is more to do with imagination. And to train these skills, we need to engage in those activities, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whether it's having conversations with friends, coming up with a fictional story, for example. And this is what led to people like Einstein and Isaac Newton having their breakthroughs. So to demonize the little voice in our head and to always be focused and mindful is a mistake. We need to be able to dynamically shift between these things. And again, the way we gain those skills is by utilizing them. So by allowing ourselves to have these flights of fancy, to think creatively, to ask ourselves problems and try and solve them just as a habit. I've talked about in the past something that I call big idea meditation. I'll give myself prompts. I'll say to myself, try and come up with a solution to this problem. Try and think of an app that could do this. Or try and think of what you would write if you were suddenly in charge of the next James Bond film. How could I take his character in an interesting direction? These are just mental exercises that encourage creative and divergent thinking, but they've led to a whole bunch of interesting breakthroughs. But you don't have to do big idea meditation. You can engage in a deep philosophical conversation with somebody. You know, the art of long conversation is lost for many adults, but it's such a powerful thing for stretching the mental muscle. You can write stories, you can write fiction. I'm writing a fictional story at the moment, and just think about how much information you need to retain in your brain at once when you're creating a fictional world, all the characters, their motivations. There must be a separate compartment in the brain somewhere where you're just storing all this information. This is the kind of thinking we need if we want to keep that kind of cognitive flexibility. And this is where AI comes in and why it's so dangerous. When we become dependent on a tool to do these things for us, we risk losing the ability to perform the tasks ourselves. Just like physical training, it's a case of use it or lose it. The research is already beginning to back this up. We have every reason to think that overuse of tools like ChatGPT can actually cause certain brain areas to shrink and lose connections, impairing our ability to think creatively or critically, maybe even damaging our ability to communicate. Consider the way that GPS devices reduce our ability to navigate. GPS has been around for a while now, and most of us consider that no harm has been done on the whole. But studies looking at the brains of taxi drivers before and after they began relying on GPS demonstrate a drastic reduction in brain mass and an accompanying loss of ability. Now that's just GPS, and we can probably live without that for the most part these days, but now think about how that could affect things like critical thinking, communication, creativity. If we lose these abilities, that could be devastating, not just to our productivity, but also to our, very humanity, not to overstate it too much. And then what happens when those same tech CEOs start using those AIs to promote propaganda, something we've already seen from certain individuals, or to promote products? Sounds a bit hysterical, I probably would have thought so too, but in the last few years, we've been given no reason to think that they wouldn't stoop that low. So yeah, it's of paramount importance that we don't overly rely on AI. This isn't just hypothetical, this is something I've actually experienced personally. These days I consider myself quite critical of AI. That's because of the very generic outputs it gives, which is, a product of its very nature. It's because of the blatant intellectual property theft, because of the massive overhyping from tech CEOs who drastically overstate its capabilities, and it's because a lot of those tech CEOs are just bad dudes who don't have our best intentions at heart, clearly. But when it first came out, I was quite interested in AI. I'm not a Luddite, I like technology, and I was keen to try it out. I used it for a lot of programming, and I even made some content on it. More worryingly though, I was using it for things like ideation when it came to titles for videos, or even topics, for even wording things in a way to make them more engaging. I'd find myself asking ChatGPT for its opinion on things that I previously would have done myself. I identify myself as a writer. I love writing. I work for a magazine called Writer's News. I have 4 published books, and one of them is a bestseller. And I've been doing this on YouTube for over 10 years. It's been fairly successful. I clearly don't need the help of an AI, so why was I outsourcing to AI? Worst of all, not only does it hallucinate and come up with, incorrect information sometimes, which can make you look stupid if you don't spot it, but it also is sycophantic. AI will always agree with you, it will always find studies to back up what you're saying. So you think you're being super smart and you think you've done the due diligence, but that's just what it's designed to do. I've literally had debates in the comments of my videos with people who were just copy-pasting their answers from ChatGPT. That is dystopian, and it's also kind of sad. So what I'm saying is that optimal cognitive performance isn't just being focused and being able to store information, it's also being creative and allowing your mind to wander. These states are somewhat diametrically opposed, which is why it's folly to think you should only train one. It's also why things like smart drugs and biohacks just don't work, because most often they're designed purely to stimulate the brain, to increase excitatory neurotransmitters like dopamine, to make us more switched on, more focused and more alert. Whilst this might help us with certain tasks, it actually diminishes our ability in other tasks. In particular, with that creative thinking, with that problem solving. There are many studies showing that we do this better when we're relaxed. Because in this scenario, we actually don't want to be focused, we want to allow our brain to explore different ideas and different neural connections. And it's by doing this that we come up with new ideas, and this is impaired when we're overly stimulated. Even something like caffeine can actually negatively impact our ability to solve problems creatively or to think abstractly. And this even goes deeper because caffeine can negatively impact your working memory as well. Essentially, caffeine is stress in a cup. It puts us in a minor fight or flight state by decreasing adenosine, by increasing dopamine and norepinephrine. When we're in that state, our prefrontal cortex, our higher reasoning, is diminished because we're in fight or flight, we're ready to act. This is great for some aspects of focus, for example, but it's actually bad for other aspects. For example, that aforementioned task switching, the ability to update that information in your mind's eye. Yes, you become better at retaining it, but updating it or switching becomes harder because you're so focused and because you've lost some of that higher reasoning. And so for someone like me who struggles with this, caffeine actually makes me much worse. And I've realized that when I drink a lot of coffee, for example, I actually go quite starey and become less responsive than when I'm not consuming large amounts of caffeine. It's going to depend on the situation as well. If you're under heavy cognitive load, this is going to make matters worse. If you're someone who's very sensitive, very anxious in general, this is going to make matters worse. If you're someone who's generally relaxed, you need a little bit of a boost, then caffeine could still be useful. As usual, the real story is far more nuanced and detailed than a lot of what's online would have you believe. This is something else to consider, how emotions and mental state impact cognitive ability. We know that stress actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex, so if you're a very anxious person in general, or if you're going through a very hard time and struggling to cope, or if you're just unsure how to control your emotions, how do you think that's going to impact on your brain function? This is why I also highly recommend therapy, not just for people who are struggling with depression or serious mental health disorders, but for anybody who wants to get the very most out of their brains. A good therapist can provide tools and insights that will enhance your cognitive performance almost instantly. I went to see a therapist for over a year, both to deal with some past trauma and to explore the possibility of ADD. I didn't get any concrete answers regarding the latter, but I did become far more aware of how my changing brain state impacts my ability to switch focus, and some of the strategies that I can use to give myself a fighting chance. This has genuinely had tangible and noticeable benefits in my everyday life. I no longer lay the table wrong every morning, for example. As many of you know as well, I've got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, and learning about tools like cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive restructuring, and better understanding the neurochemistry of the brain, all of this helped me to improve at controlling my own mental state to facilitate the kind of mental performance I need. In short then, learning about the brain in general, working through past traumas or potential mental health issues that might be affecting you can have immediate and tangible benefits, not just in the way you feel, but also in the way you perform. There's a reason why sports psychology is a profession, and that might be a video for another time if you guys are interested. So with all that in mind, what am I saying? How do I recommend you go about training your brain function? Well, the conclusion of this video is essentially to say that, yeah, brain training apps aren't going to change your life. Rather, brain training is something that you should do by playing sports, by spending time with friends, by getting into debates, by writing articles and essays, by reading, and by learning new skills. As with functional training, we need to immerse ourselves fully in dynamic and changing situations and challenge our brains in a myriad of ways. I talked about the difference between high focus and creative thinking, but this is still just scratching the surface of what the brain can do. What about learning new skills? What about researching? What about learning long-term information? What about your ability to bring back that information when you need it? What about abstract thinking or emotional intelligence? There are so many different aspects to human cognition, and we need to train all these things by getting out in the world and challenging ourselves, by taking on new hobbies, new skills, and by constantly exploring what we're capable of and testing ourselves. That is how you'll truly see your brain function improve. And the other takeaway from this video is to make sure you're not overly relying on AI, because it robs some of these most important experiences and prevents you from developing your brain as much as you definitely should be. And if you are looking for a workout program designed to also consider brain training and how you can improve your brain function through physical activity, then you might like my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training 2.0. It's designed to build strength, mobility, endurance, and cognitive performance all at once, and you can find it in the link in the description down below. Either way, guys, thank you so much for watching this one, and bye for now.